G'day, welcome to Pay It Forward. Today I am adding to my little play doll collection. Now this is a little collection I've just started. I did promise you a bunny. So this month we have a bunny and their little carrot friend, also made with a bead. This is a bead doll that is made with a very simple body, great for on-selling, super quick and easy to make. So your free pattern is in the drop-down description box below, the link to those templates. You'll be able to print those out on your own home printer. I do include all seam allowances in all of my patterns. It just makes it so much easier for everyone. So let's get busy and start number 2 in the series of little play dolls, which is our beautiful bunny. Welcome everybody to making up our beautiful little play doll. Now this is the first in the series. A lot of you have already made this one up. The little bear, so it's our little doll dressed in her little bear hood, and she's got a little teddy bear there as well. They're all made up in the same way. Well, at this point in time they are. I'll be introducing all sorts of different shapes. Coming into this, we're going to be, as I was saying, we're going to be doing flowers and fruits and vegetables, and I'm just going to slowly introduce you to the concept, but they definitely will get more complex with more fine detailed work to do. But for now I want to establish just a basic range. So we've got the little bear one. Now this time we're making the bunny, and the bunny is having a little carrot friend. So each time they are made up with a bead head that is on a bolt and has a little joint at the bottom there. So what you need each time is the 30mm wooden bead, and it has to be a 30mm because that's the way I designed the hoods and the hats and so on to fit a 30mm bead. You need a 40mm roofing bolt available at your hardware store, and then either a washer to suit. This is a 16mm resin jointing disc and a nut to suit. That's how we joint it very, very securely to the body. They're a very safe doll to play with, and they are intended to be nice and strong and to be played with. So that's what you need each time for the head. So this is the little head ready for my bunny. So let's have a look what we're going to need to put the bunny together. This time I'm introducing you to some Minky fabric. The fabric for the body needs to be very, very soft, but it also needs to be quite stable, or certainly stable enough. Now Minky fabric, a lot of you may have used it. It's very, very soft. It's quite lovely, and the good ones, good quality ones, have quite a stable backing. So you have your rectangle cut out for the front, and then you have your 2 pieces cut out for the back. You can see I've already got those cut there. And we actually trace our doll shape out and put it together in a very, very simple way. So you're going to also need the little hood part. So this time, as I said, making a little bunny. So we've got our 2 side head pieces. I'm making my bunny a grey bunny, which will look really nice with the Minky pink. We've got the 2 side head pieces. Now these are all cut from just pure wool felt. I'm using pure wool felt. I prefer it for the hoods. It is more expensive, however you only need a tiny bit for those hats, but you can certainly use just your washable acrylic like I did with this one. So pure wool felt for me this time. That's the head gusset there, and then we have our 2 ear pieces, also just cut from felt. Now I haven't treated the felt in any way. I want it to be nice, soft and pliable. Those little ears are going to be put into the head seam, just as we did with this one. So those are your head pieces. We are also going to need some little beads to go into the feet and hands, and they are 10 to 12mm. I've got 10mm ones here. 4 little beads there. It just gives a lovely finish to the hands and feet. You will need your extra strong threads throughout. I use them for the tiny blanket stitch. I use the Gutermann extra strong threads. I've got a couple of colours there. They're going to work with my project. You can embellish your little one any way you like, certainly with little flowers, beads, embroidery, anything you like. For our little bunny, you can add a tail if you like. I will probably just add a little button. And then I'm creating a companion for this one. So this companion is going to be a little carrot. So the carrot has a little bead head as well. Very, very cute. We're going to be introducing tiny little characters with tiny beads like that. So I've got that one already done. I show you at the beginning of this video how to prepare the beads and how to easily paint those little eyes. You can, of course, make those faces way more detailed, but for me, this is a very pure, simple collection. And remember that if you over detail it, you sort of change the integrity of the whole concept. So keep it simple. You'll find that children are more attracted to very simple things. So that little bead there is around about a 15 millimeter. So it can be a little bigger, it doesn't matter, but mine's about 15 millimeter. That's just about perfect. So when you're making those beads and gluing all of your bits and pieces together, you will need an epoxy 5-minute glue, so a super strong glue. And you're going to need some paint to paint your little eyes on your bead. Just a Jo Sonja's black I have here. And to get those eye circles beautifully even and perfect, just use a wooden skewer. We use the end rather than using a brush. And for our carrot, we've got our 2 felt pieces here. This is wool felt again, a beautiful quality of wool felt. We have our 2 pieces cut, we trace our carrot shape around it, and we're going to be stitching through. I've created this series to be super quick and easy for you to put together. The joy and the beauty is in the little bit of hand stitching that we do and all of the embellishments that you want to add. But they're very quick and easy to put together. So that's the base of my carrot. And inside of that little bead head, we're going to be adding my chenille sticks, which are all folded up there. So those chenille sticks are going to be glued into the head, and it's going to pop down in there. We're going to wrap some wadding or wool around this section to fill the body, and then we're just going to drop it in. So you can do it with polyester filling. I'm using carded wool. Carded wool is beautiful. It's quite a raw wool. You can wrap it around, use your wool felting needles and pack it down. Super easy. Alternatively, just use your polyester filling. I'll show you how. And also you could use just some fine strips of quilt wadding and wrap them around. That will work as well. Now for our carrot tops, I'm just using some pearl thread. I've got a variegated green here. I'm just creating a little tuft out the top. That's also going to slip in the top of that bead. It will be glued into place. So I've got what amounts to 18 strands there. This is 5-ply, and I've wrapped it with my sticky tape. I've wrapped really nice and tight around the center, so that's ready for me to snip, drop in, then I can trim the top. And also for our little carrot, we're going to be doing a little bit of wrapping and needle sculpting around the carrot. And we'll do that with an extra strong thread. So I've got my orange there. As I said, any little embellishments that you want to add, you can do so there. So you will need some clear craft glue and a tiny bit of polyester filling. So that's about it. That's all we need. We're going to get started by creating the little bead head. And of course, the smaller one is made, you paint it in exactly the same way, and then you'll see how we put them together. Let's move on and I'll show you how to put that head together. And then from there, we will go on to creating the body, which again is the same every time. And you'll see me putting this one together. Then we'll come back ready to do the little bunny hood. So to make up the little head for all of my little play dolls in this series, they are all made up with a 30 millimeter wooden bead. You can see that one there. They usually come with a varnished finish. It's fine, you can use a varnish finish or you can use a natural bead. It doesn't matter, either way, a coat of varnish over the top will finish it off, but you can still add the eyes to a varnished one and it will still stay on and not be a problem. So first step with these is they are made by machine, so there's often some rough edges, so I just take a little file and make sure that I've got all the edges in there nice and smooth before I start. And then I'm going to take my Araldite, which is my 5-minute epoxy glue. I'm going to pop a small amount of that onto just a scrap of cardboard here. I'm going to take a skewer and mix it all up. And once it's all mixed up, I'm going to take my bolt. This is the same way that I make up my joints. I'm going to take up some of that glue and add it around the inside of the head of that bolt. And then I'm going to drop that bolt straight through. I'm going to pull it down. I'm going to add the 16mm disc and the nut, and that's just going to hold it nice and tight while that glue dries. You can set that aside then to dry. Okay, so once that bolt is dry, we can go ahead and paint the little eyes in place. So I always do it, the painting of the eyes, after I've put the bolt in, because it gives you something to hold on to. So I take, the easiest way to do this, I've got my little bit of black Jo Sonja's. So I'm using just Jo Sonja's Carbon Black. It is just a matte acrylic, artist quality. So I've got a little bit of that, I've got a little bit of water, and I've got my wooden skewer, which has the pointed end and that tiny, tiny little round end that you can see there. Check the end of your skewer, make sure it is a nice, neat round end. And that's what we're going to use. We're not going to use a brush. If you use a brush, you're going to get into all sorts of trouble. We want the perfect circle. Simplest way to do that, first of all, let's measure the eyes. So the eyes sit halfway, right in the middle of your bead, and it might look to you, oh, that's going to be too low down, but we're putting a little hood over here, remember, and coming up underneath the chin, and it's going to sit up over that bolt as well. Every time we make these dolls, the whole top of the bead will be covered with some kind of a hat or a hood. So the measurement between the eyes, the best is anywhere from 1 centimetre to 1 1/4 centimetres. You don't want it wider than that because the hood will come around and block it. If you want to put them even closer together, you can, but the sweet spot is around about, I would say it's around about 12mm apart. So I've just taken my pencil and marked that in. I've made sure that they're absolutely straight. Easier to do than you think because the wooden beads often have that swirl going around, so you can line that up. So now I'm going to dip the pointed end of my skewer into my paint just to give it a little bit of thinning. I don't want the paint too thick. Give that a mix around. Just turn that around, get rid of that paint on the end. Then I'm going to flip it and I'm going to take my round end and just drop it in. And I'm just going to put one dot. One dot, simple as that. Drop it in and one dot. So if you've ever wondered how people get perfect eyes on peg dolls, that's how they do it. They certainly don't use a brush. So the important thing about this is you really, really, really need to let this dry. If you try and coat this with varnish before it's super dry, of course it's just going to spread. So go ahead, let that dry completely, and then take your gloss varnish with a soft brush, just a simple soft brush, and just coat over the top, and then those little eyes are absolutely permanent. Now I highly recommend that you make up quite a few of these heads at the same time and do it all at once. And you can have a whole little box of them ready to go, all glued up with their bolts and eyes in place. Makes it so much easier for you to reach for one and put it together very, very quickly. So I'm going to let that dry completely, and I would coat it as I said, and this is going to be my end result. So it's the same every single time. We will be making these dolls up in even a smaller head and possibly a larger head. But for now, this series is based on this 30mm wooden bead. Let's start on the body now. Now this body is for our basic play doll, our little play bead doll, and the body is made the same every time. So it's like a little onesie, very easy to put together, but put together in a very unique way. Just trimming off my threads there. Now the first thing that you want to do, you've got your two back pieces, that's what we start with, and I have gone ahead and sewn a close zigzag stitch on both of those openings. It's going to stop them fraying and it's going to stop them stretching. So between those opening marks, do that on both sides. Then we're going to put right sides together. We're going to line that up and we are going to sew the centre back seam, what will be the centre back seam of our doll. It's a 4mm seam allowance, and you're going to stitch to that opening. Make sure you back and forth a few times, and same with the top of the opening up to here. And you only need to sew it once, but I have my stitch length set to a 1.8, so it's a very tiny stitch. Once you've stitched that seam, I want you to take it to the iron and press the seam open and flat. I've pressed out that centre seam nice and flat, and also that opening. So there's the opening. So the opening is towards the top. And now we're going to do the tricky part. So we're going to take our front piece, which has our two marks on it, and we're going to line that up very close to the top there with the centre seam. You want to make sure that they are perfectly lined up. And then we're going to take our template of our little body, our heat erasable marker, and we're going to line that up nice and straight. Take a ruler if you have one to line it up with those two marks, and then you're going to trace around the entire outside edge. I hope you can see that. So I've traced all the way around. Make sure you leave a 1/2 centimetre at the top there for your seam allowance when we trim that off. So you can see I've thrown a couple of pins in so everything stays lined up, and in each of the arms and the legs. So now I can take this to the machine, and rather than having to cut out two separate pieces and try and pin them all together, these little parts and these sweet little curves here, we can just stitch directly on the line all the way around with our little 1.8 stitch length, right the way around, all across the top. Go across the top section here a couple of times because we're going to put a hole through that for our neck joint, and it's much easier. You'll get a beautiful finish on all of those curves, way more professional, and it takes half the time. So now I'm going to go and stitch around that entire outside edge. So you can see there I've stitched all the way around. I've gone twice over the neck area and just made sure that little crotch seam has gone over a couple of times as well. So you can see, way easier to keep that stitching absolutely perfect. And now we're just going to go ahead and cut that one out. I'm leaving about a 4mm seam allowance all the way around. And you only need to sew it once because we're not adding any firm stuffing in this little doll. It's all very soft, and if you keep your stitch length to that 1.8, you'll find that's absolutely perfect. Once I've cut this out, I'm going to take it back to my iron just to remove those heat erasable marker marks. And now I've got the perfect little body stitched up with that centre back seam and that opening. Tricky, hey? So much easier. Now before I turn it through, I'm going to take my awl up into that opening and straight through that centre mark. I am going to make a hole ready for that neck joint. Just enlarge that a little. And then I'm going to turn this little one through. Easiest way I find is take your forceps in, tuck a little bit of that hand in, and just gently pull that through. Do the same with each of the arms and the legs. Just gently does it. And then the whole thing will pull through easily. Go in there gently with your needle and push out all those seams. Make sure that you take the time to roll out all of those seams because we're not stuffing this firm, so just roll them out so you've got your shape right. While that's nice and flat, you can go ahead and take your body template that you've got that has the arm sections marked in, make those marks, and then use your ruler and draw a line. Using my heat erasable marker again, I've drawn in those lines ready. We're going to stitch over those, but first we're going to add the little beads into the hands. So just a matter of slipping those in there. Like I said, that sized bead, that is about a 10 to 12 millimetre, seems to fit quite well. Just adjust them to sit nice. Same with the other side. You can do the feet at the same time if you want. Get those nicely into place. We're not going to add any stuffing into the arms at all because we want them to be able to fold over. When we stitch that seam, they'll be able to fold over nicely and have that cute little pose there. So make sure that bead is really pushed to the end. I'm taking a single strand of extra strong thread, and right where that bead finishes, I'm going to sew a running stitch all the way around that little wrist. Leave the tail ends hanging. I always start at the back and follow right the way around. Little stitches will pull it in better. And you do this the same on the legs as well. Till you get back to your start. You could do this with a doubled strand, but I find the single strand's more than enough. Pull that in, and I'm simply going to knot that off. As I pull that in, it's going to really push that bead nice and snug to the end. We've got that nice little wrist happening there. Make sure it's super tight, knot that off at least 4 times. Then you can rethread your needle and just take the ends in and out and snip the thread ends so that they're completely hidden in there. So do the same with the other hand and do the little feet as well. Those little hands and feet are in place now, and now I'm going to take this to my machine and I'm going to stitch right over those lines that I made that will give me that nice little fold over for the arms. So do make sure that you back and forth on your start and finish to make sure that that's nice and secure. And so there we go, we've got the perfect little onesie body for any of my 30mm bead dolls. So this is the same for everyone in the series that uses the 30mm head, and you can see just how simple it is. Those little arms will fold in nicely now. Now, if you want to add any embellishments to this doll at the front, it's a good idea to do it while you've got this back still open. So you can sew on any buttons or any little, I'm going to probably add just a little flower and a button, and I can still do that through that back opening. But that is your basic body for your 30mm bead doll. Right, so here I am with my little Minky body. You just saw me put together one in flannelette material, cotton flannelette. The Minky makes up absolutely beautifully, slightly different to work with, but you just put it together in exactly the same way. You can see lovely soft result for little hands to play with. And if you get a Minky that's got a nice stable backing fabric, you'll find it really easy. So I've added 2 little grey pom-poms at the front because I still have access through the back. And I've added a button with a little white pom-pom as well. So that's all ready to go. We can put that one aside. And we're going to go ahead and start making the little hood. So we need our hood pieces for our bunny. And we're going to start with the ears. So first thing we need to do is to sew a tiny blanket stitch around the whole top edge of the ear. And what this does is, of course, it gives it a beautiful finish, but it also strengthens the edge of the felt. And then we've got a little toy that can be played with and will stand the test of time. So I'm using my Gutermann Extra Strong thread, a single strand, and I've got a little knot in the end. We're going to start at the bottom, and I'm just going to go in between the 2 layers here and come out on my corner. That little knot will just sit there on the base, and it will be hidden because we're sewing this into the seam. So it really is just a matter of doing a tiny little blanket stitch. So that just means you take your needle through the layer of fabric and bring your needle out through the loop each time. And you want to keep your stitches tiny. They're about, barely 2mm apart. And you see the thread is coming through that loop each time. I've got a video that shows you how to sew the blanket stitch. I will put the link at the top of the screen there for you if you want a closer look. But it's really just that simple. You could use embroidery floss to do this. I would use 2 strands if you're using embroidery floss, but I do prefer using the Extra Strong thread, and it comes in so many colours. So you can see I'm just going to work that tiny stitch all the way around to the same place on the other side. And when I get to the base, I'll still have my thread on. I fold the ear in half, just at the base, and just make a few tacking stitches to hold it, just like I have with this one. So that way it's all ready to go into that seam. Okay, so that has my 2 little ears done, and they're ready to add to that hood. So now we're going to start sewing up the hood pieces. So I'm going to start with one of my side head pieces and my centre head gusset. The widest part is at the front, and the narrow part is at the back of the neck here. We're going to be lining up the top edges, and I'm doing my work on the centre head gusset. I'm not sewing from the side head piece. So with this one, I don't pin it. I just watch it as I go. It will ease in and fit in perfectly. And I have my Extra Strong thread ready, and I'm just going to start overcasting this one into place. I don't use a knot when I start off here, so I pull my thread through, I hold it down, and I just make another stitch over the top of it. I'm doing that because I'm trying to reduce the bulk, and I don't want knots there. So now I'm just going to continue on with tiny stitches. Now that that's held, I can snip that little section off. That's just a little trick that I use a lot in my sewing to avoid ugly knots. So what we're going to be doing is adding the ear in here. So this is where our mark is for the ear. We've got right sides together. The mark is on the other side, but we need to sandwich the ear in between the two layers. And it will start at the mark and the ear opening is facing forward. So just remember that. So I've got a few more stitches to do before I get there. And then when I do, I'm just going to incorporate it into my overcasting stitch. So I need to watch where that is. A couple more stitches. You have to make sure that when you're sewing the opposite side that you keep it really even so the ears are nice and even. So I'm going to pull that back now. I can see that that's where that little ear should be starting. I do extend it just a little so that I know I'm definitely catching all the edges. Lay that back over and I'm going to continue on and capturing that base of that ear as I go. You're just working with felt, so it's quite a few layers, but it's very soft. Curling that around as I go, still meeting that up with the head. We do turn this little head through. It gives us a nice clean result when we do that. So just making sure that that base of that ear is well caught within the seam. And then I'm going to continue on to match that up all the way down to the base of the neck. Just flipped that mat over, you might be able to see better with that colour contrast with the pink. So there you see, I've got the hood, the first side hood section just overcast into place, and that little ear is incorporated into it, so it'll sit up there nicely. So now we are going to sew that seam with a tiny stab back stitch. So we start, this time we do have a knot in the end. I'm going to start just in from the edge here, come up from the underneath, that knot will hold. I'm going to bring my thread around the front. And back into that same hole, pull that through. I'll do that again. Come up from the underneath. And now I'm just going to make 2 stitches, one on top of the other. I really want this front nice and secure. And I want it all very neat and tidy. So now I'm going to sew my stab back stitch, and the seam allowance is only about 2.5 millimeters. So I've travelled along, I've come up underneath the length of one tiny stitch, and then I've gone back into my last exit hole there. Travelled along again, each time back into that last exit hole so the stitch is beautifully linked. It will be very, very strong. And as I go over that ear section, I'll make extra sure that I am capturing the base of that ear. Pull those threads nice and taut each time. And because you're sewing with extra strong thread, this is going to hold together well. So I'm going to continue that stitch all the way down to the base of the neck, and do make sure everything meets up nicely. Once you've done that, you'll do the same thing with the opposite side. So you'll be putting right sides together again, and you're doing that still working on the head gusset. Don't do it from the side headpiece. Get that one stitched into place. Remember to incorporate the little ear facing forwards. Stitch that one into place, then we can turn the whole thing through. So there I have the 2 little ears incorporated into those side head seams. Do take the time to really roll those seams out and roll from the head gusset outwards, both sides. So roll them out like that so they're well pushed out. And then you've got your little cap. Now, before we put that on our little doll head, we're going to sew that same blanket stitch that we did around the ears. We're going to sew it all around the edge of the hood. So starting from the back, I will work my way all the way around, around the face and back to the back of the neck. And you can see that gives us a beautiful finish right the way around, frames up the face nicely. I'll be using that same grey that I used on the ears. So that has that little cap all beautifully stitched. You can see it also pulls it in just a little. So now my final step on the hood is I'm taking a double strand of my 8-ply pearl thread in a matching colour, and I'm just going to start on the right side at the front, at the very front here, and I'm going to sew a small running stitch all the way around the lower edge, so just about where your blanket stitch finishes. So it's probably about 3 millimeters in, and it's a double strand, and I'm going to leave the tail ends hanging because this is how we're going to tie it up under the chin. So make your way all the way around to the other side and finish on the front of this side, this corner here as well, so that when we pull it in, those little front corners tuck in nicely. So I'm going to leave those ends hanging for now so that I've got plenty of length to tie up that little bow when we add that to the head. If you want to add any more little embellishments to this hood, you do it now before we add it to the head. Just as I did with the little bear, I just added the little flower with the bead. So I may add a flower at the front here with a little button. So now let's move on to adding the bead head to the body. So let's go ahead and add the little bead head to the body, and we're going to do that by taking our awl, and we're going to pop a finger up there inside that body, and you want to make a hole, I've already done mine, right in the center there, and take your awl through, all the way through, to create a hole large enough to accommodate that bolt. You can enlarge it with a knitting needle if you need to. Then we're simply going to take that head and pass that bolt through. Make sure that you're really pushing all of that fabric down around that bolt there. Then we're going to add our disc and our nut. Just finger tighten for the moment because we want to check that we've got nothing caught up between those layers. Make sure everything's pulled out beautifully. And then you can go ahead and tighten that up with your spanner. Nice and secure. Make sure your little face is looking forwards. If you want to have it a little more loose, you can, so that you've got some posability. And then you just simply go ahead and add one little drop of super glue in there on the threads. One drop will stop that nut ever coming adrift. So with that little doll head nicely in place now, we can add just a little bit of polyester filling. So easiest to do that with some forceps, and I don't overfill these little dolls. They need to be nice and soft. I do fill the lower section of the legs. I keep the thigh area soft so that they're nice and posable. The little beads in the end of the feet just make them feel lovely and little hands to hold. And just fill in up around the top of the neck and around that bolt so that it supports the head. You can use your wool felting needle here if you have one to help tuck that filling in place. You could fill these little dolls with fine plastic pellets as well to make them like a little Beanie Baby style. Then they're very poseable. It usually works, if you're going to do that, do add a little bit of filling, polyester filling in the centre as well, just to keep it all nice and soft. So I'm really not overdoing that. I want it nice and squishy and squashy. Those little hands need to sit at the front, which they do. And when you're using minky fabric like this, you don't need much at all because it's got a little bit of volume to it anyway. So once you've got the amount in that you're happy with, you can go ahead and close that back opening. Now I'm going to insert the footage of me closing the back opening on the little bear one because it's much easier for you to see. So I'm just going to travel back and forth each time, going back into that last exit hole and pulling it in every couple of stitches, and it will nicely close that opening. It will be quite invisible. Just make your way down, all the way down to the bottom. So there we go, you should have a nice invisible seam closing there. So once you have that back opening closed on your doll, we're now going to add that little hood. So you can see what we're going to do is just slip it over the head, position it in place, then we're going to tie up that bow, just as we did with the little bear doll. So, but what I do like to do is add just a little bit of clear craft glue. Let me grab my glue. And I do that on the back and the crown of the head, just because it helps me position that cap beautifully in place. And I add that to the bead, not to the cap. Again, make sure that you have rolled out all of those seams so that that cap is going to slip on perfectly. So it's just a little bit of craft glue and just smear that in place on the back. So again, you're going to pull that little cap on, position it exactly where you want it, and then pull those thread ends in nice and tight around the neck and tie yourself a lovely bow. So there we go, the perfect little bunny doll. Now let's move ahead and make her little carrot friend. So now let's begin on making a little tiny carrot, a little carrot friend. So we've started with our bead, which we've painted with the eyes just the same as you would the other bead on our bunny. So that's all done and I've glossed that over. Next you need to take a chenille stick and you're going to create a 6 centimetre, I'm just going to measure here. So I've measured to 6 centimetres and making a fold. And I folded it once, twice, and 3 times, keeping it to that 6 centimetres. I'm going to snip that off, make sure it's exactly 6, and then we're going to snip that off at the end. The end where it's all folded, that's the end that we squeeze nice and tight, mould that down, and that's the end that we're going to glue into the bead, which I've done there. So you can see that's what I've done. I've used my epoxy glue, so it's nice and strong, that's never coming away there. And when you glue it in only halfway because we need the top of the little carrot tops that we're going to add. There needs to be room for those to be glued in as well. So that's been sitting there, it's glued, the glue is nicely set, and now we can go ahead and make the rest. So first of all, I'm going to take my 2 pieces of felt. This is pure wool felt here. I love this particular orange in the pure wool felt, and there's nothing added to it, just plain felt. I've traced around my pattern template And now I'm going to just stitch. I'm going to make sure I go back and forth on my start and finish, and I'm going to sew with a nice close stitch on number 2 length around this bottom edge right on that line. This line was drawn with heat erasable marker, so I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to cut out my little carrot shape. So I have stitched around and then I've cut my little carrot shape out, just left a tiny seam allowance there and turned that one through. Again, make sure that you really roll out all of those seams and really get in there and push out the tip of that carrot. So my next step is to sew a running stitch with a single strand of extra strong thread around the top edge, and we want to come in really nice and close to this top edge here. Now I'm using green, you don't have to. I'm using green because I don't mind the idea of seeing a little bit of green showing, not that you see much show. You can match it to the colour of your carrot if you like. So I'm just going to stitch all the way around. I'm leaving my tail ends hanging so that we can tie this off around the little neck of the carrot. So I can go ahead and leave those tail ends hanging there. I'm just going to tie just my first knot in that. Ready to go. I won't pull that in, but just tie that ready. And now we want to do a little bit of detailing, thread detailing on this carrot when it's done. So what I like to do is take a double strand of whatever colour you're using. I'm just using orange. It's a slightly lighter tone. And I'm going to take, I've got a double strand on my fine doll needle, and I'm going to just take it through the base. Just down the bottom, there's a nice big knot at the end, and that's going to hold. And I can actually leave that needle on for now. So that's all ready to go. What we have to do now is prepare this little section here. So we spoke at the beginning about using either some core wool or some polyester filling. You could even wrap pieces cut of quilt wadding, but what we're looking to do is wrap this little carrot into a carrot shape. And I'm going to be using my felting needle to really make that happen. Just shaping that up. Pull that in around. And I'm going to take my felting needle. I'm just using my 36 here just to compress all of that down. Now you really can basically do this with your polyester filling. This is core wool and it felts down really quickly. It's a much coarser wool than wool roving, the top wool. So I'm really just looking to make a little carrot shape that's going to slip down into that little carrot. So my little carrot is wrapped in a very simple little carrot shape. It's a little bit smaller than this one. I can see that that's going to slip in there well. Certainly not packed down, it's just forming that soft little shape. As I said, you can do it with your polyester filling, and you can always take some thread and just wrap it around to shape your polyester filling like that, and that will slip in there as well. I won't need to do that with mine being that core wool. So now all I need to do is slip that in and make sure that you're putting the little face of the carrot at the front and keep your seams at the side. And we're going to slip that in. You want to push it all the way down. Remember, you've got that nice strong chenille stick in the middle, and it can just take a little bit of tugging to get it all the way down to the base there. As you do so, some of this filling will come up around the neck area, and that's actually great because it gives us a nice full neck area. We can always go in with our felting needle and fix that. As you can see there, so pushed right down. Ease that up. We've got that little head popping out there. Gonna just encourage that up. So my little carrot is just peeping over the top. And then I'm going to take just my 40 felting needle and I'm going to tuck that all in. So knowing the very basics in needle felting is going to be really useful in this series, and I'm going to be introducing it to you in the simplest ways. But it really makes making little tiny things a lot easier by being able to use your filling or little bits of wool and shape it rather than stitch it. So that's all tucked in there nicely. I'm making sure he's facing the front. I've got my drawstring all ready. Now all I need to do is pull that in nice and tight around his neck. Nice and snug. I'm going to knot that off about 4 times, keeping that tension up. Check that you've got that all good. It's nicely tucked in. Knot that off 4 times. I'm going to rethread my ends and take them and lose them into the body of that carrot. So that has that little carrot neck pulled in there, and now I can take my needle where I've already had my thread going through and I can begin to wrap around, and I can pull that in and create whatever kind of little carrot whirls I like. You can go in every now and then, and there we go. So you get the idea. It's just a matter of plunging in and out along the way so that that thread stays put. It's also bound everything together for you. You can really pull it in. You can make it quite gnarly, totally up to you. You could use a darker thread if you like. I had to use the orange that I had. I didn't have another one. Ideally, you would go darker on that thread because it looks like it's pulling in more. But that is super cute. So now I'm just going to add the top knot. So as I said, I've got about 18 to 20 strands there, and I'm simply going to cut it off right close to the end of that tape, so that I'm going to be able to glue that straight in. I want it to be quite snug. And I will pop that in there with my epoxy glue. I may need to compress that a little bit more. And I will glue that in place. Once it's all glued in and dry, I'm going to trim those little carrot tops and we will be ready to pop her with the little bunny. So there she is, all complete with her little carrot friend. I've given him a haircut, given him a little trim there. You can have as long or short as you like. It just comes together beautifully. It's such a lovely addition to the play set. Remember, we've got the little chair you can always make up. We've got little, look at the back view, that little tail at the back there, super cute. I think she goes beautifully with the little bear. Let's bring her in. Perfect size for little hands to play with, and as this series grows, you're going to be able to pop them in gorgeous little baskets as a collection. Certainly sell them online. They're a great product to on sell, and I encourage you to do that. So next one coming along, I'm thinking probably a little doll dressed as a duck, but I could surprise you with something else. I'm really thoroughly enjoying these. It's just fun for me. So looking forward to see what you do with little bunny, and thank you so much for joining me. So I'm looking forward to lots of bunnies this week on our Facebook page. If you haven't joined our Facebook page, come along and do that. I'll put the link down below. a great bunch of people. We're all like-minded, and you can share anything you've made with my patterns, whether it be masterclass or anything, any of the projects here on Pay It Forward, and I do love to see them. If you want to chat to me one-on-one, definitely come and follow me on my Instagram page. Lots going on over there, and if you really want to get my attention, you can private message me there, chat to me about whatever you like. I love to hear from you all. Sometimes you just update me on what you're doing, and if you really want me to see a project that I might have missed on the page, definitely put it right under my nose there in Instagram, and I will enjoy seeing it. Thank you so much, everybody who does communicate with me that way. It really does keep me going. So lots coming up. We have, of course, masterclass in a couple of days. Very exciting this month. I think it's a bit of a crowd pleaser. I think you're going to love it. So I will put the link to join masterclass there also. So join me on the 1st for that launch. And also for Pay It Forward coming up, of course, I'll be adding to this series and our other series. I am working on a new memory bear pattern for you all. I wanted to give you another option. My memory bear pattern is a very, very successful pattern because it's designed particularly for using fabric and for utilizing clothing and so on. In a simple way. So it's one of the best memory bear patterns out there, I believe, and certainly the work that you're all doing with them is absolutely amazing. So it's time for a new one. It'll be a new shape. I'm going for more of a really grizzly bear sort of a shape. Absolutely gorgeous, still designed in that way to use your fabrics with no pile. So look forward to that. I promise I'm working hard on that one. So definitely stay tuned. So everybody, look, have a fantastic week. Join me here on the 1st. Keep on sharing the word about Pay It Forward across your other sewing platforms, and let's bring more people in to access these great free patterns. Until next time, everybody, keep on being creative and remember to pay all of those good things forward. Till next time, it is hooroo from me.